Imagine walking into a meeting with an idea you believe could solve a serious problem. You have prepared carefully. You understand the numbers. You have anticipated objections. You are confident that your proposal is better than the current approach. 10 minutes into the meeting, someone challenges you. You respond immediately. You explain why their objection is mistaken. They push back. You produce more evidence. Another person joins them. You become even more precise. By the end of the meeting, you may have won almost every factual point, and somehow, your idea is now less likely to be accepted than when you entered the room. What happened? The answer lies in a dimension of human interaction that rational argument often underestimates. People do not receive ideas as detached reasoning machines. We receive ideas through identity, emotion, status, trust, pride, fear, memory, and our interpretation of the person delivering them. We want to be understood. We want to matter. We want some control over our decisions. We dislike humiliation. We defend our identities. We often resist pressure even when the person applying it has a reasonable point. And sometimes the fastest way to make someone reject an idea is to make accepting it feel like admitting personal defeat. This territory is the subject of Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. First published in the 1930s, the book became one of the most famous works ever written about interpersonal relations. Its title can sound calculating to modern ears. Winning friends and influencing people may suggest techniques for obtaining social advantage, and some readers do approach it that way. Learn the rules, use people's names, smile, give compliments, ask questions, avoid direct criticism, become more persuasive. But that interpretation misses the most interesting psychological idea in Carnegie's work. Human beings respond differently when they feel respected. Much of Carnegie's advice revolves around this basic observation. People want recognition. They want attention. They want to preserve dignity. They want their perspective considered. And if you understand those needs, conversations change. The challenge is that the same knowledge can be used in two very different ways. You can understand people in order to relate to them better, or you can understand people in order to control them better. The behavior on the surface may look almost identical. That distinction between interpersonal skill and manipulation is where Carnegie becomes especially interesting today. Consider appreciation. Suppose you manage a small team. One employee has spent several days fixing a difficult problem that nobody else wanted to touch. They solve it quietly. The next morning you say, "Good job." Technically, you have praised them. But now imagine saying something more specific. "I noticed you stayed with that problem after the first two approaches failed. The solution you found prevented the rest of the team from losing another day. That persistence mattered." The difference is significant. Generic praise can feel automatic. Specific appreciation communicates attention. You saw what the person actually did. This reveals something fundamental about human recognition. We do not merely want positive words. We want evidence that another person has noticed us accurately. Imagine cooking dinner for someone. They take one bite while looking at their phone and say it's great. Compare that with someone saying, "The sauce tastes different tonight. Did you add something?" Even before they say whether they like it, the second response can feel more meaningful. Why? Attention itself is a form of recognition. To notice is to communicate that the other person's effort entered your awareness. This is one reason appreciation matters so much in relationships. A large amount of human effort is invisible. Cleaning, planning, remembering, preparing, checking, coordinating, listening, preventing problems, following through. When invisible effort remains invisible for long enough, resentment can grow. Consider a household where one person manages most of the mental logistics. They remember appointments, notice when supplies are running low, plan meals, coordinate children's schedules, arrange repairs, and anticipate upcoming obligations. Their partner may sincerely believe responsibilities are divided fairly because visible tasks are divided. The problem is not necessarily lack of effort. It may be lack of perception. The invisible work is not being noticed. Carnegie's emphasis on appreciation suggests that relationships improve when people learn to notice contributions they have gradually begun to treat as automatic. But appreciation has a condition. It must be sincere. This is where praise and flattery separate. Flattery asks, what can I say that will make this person like me? Appreciation asks, what is genuinely valuable here that I have not acknowledged? The words may sound similar, the intention is different, and over time, people often detect the difference. Imagine a salesperson meeting a potential client. They notice a photograph of a sailboat. Wow, incredible boat. You must be an amazing sailor. The compliment has one obvious function: build rapport. Now imagine instead that the salesperson genuinely sails and asks, is that yours? Where was the photo taken? The conversation may lead to exactly the same topic, but one is a tactic. The other contains curiosity. Human beings are imperfect lie detectors, but we are often sensitive to instrumental attention. We notice when someone seems interested in us only because they want something. This is the first great tension inside Carnegie's philosophy. Interpersonal techniques work best when they stop being techniques. If you listen because listening is the fastest route to persuasion, you are not fully listening. Part of your attention remains on your objective. If you remember someone's name only because a book told you names are useful, the behavior may be correct while the relationship remains transactional. If you praise people strategically, appreciation becomes currency. The deeper transformation is not behavioral, but attentional. Other people become interesting in themselves. This leads naturally to one of Carnegie's most enduring ideas: become genuinely interested in other people. That sounds obvious. But notice how most conversations actually work. Two people meet. One says, I just got back from Mexico. The other replies, I went to Mexico 3 years ago. We stayed near Cancun. Now the conversation has already shifted. The first person's experience has become a bridge to the second person's experience. This is normal. We understand the unfamiliar by connecting it to ourselves, but the habit can become so strong that we repeatedly redirect conversations back toward our own lives. Someone says they are exhausted. We tell them how tired we are. Someone describes a difficult boss. We tell them about our former boss. Someone mentions their vacation. We describe ours. Someone says they are afraid. We offer our own story. The intention may be connection. The result can feel like competition. Who has suffered more? Who traveled somewhere better? Whose story is more interesting? Who knows more? Genuine interest interrupts this reflex. You just got back from Mexico. What surprised you most? Now the conversation stays with the other person's experience. This requires very little intelligence. It requires attention, and attention has become increasingly scarce. Imagine meeting a friend for coffee. Their phone is on the table. Every few minutes the screen lights up. Their eyes move toward it. They are still listening to you, mostly. But something changes. Part of their attention is permanently available to somewhere else. Now imagine they put the phone away, not face down on the table, away. The conversation immediately feels different. Nothing has been added. Something has been removed. Competition. Attention communicates value because attention is finite. If someone gives you something they could have given elsewhere, the gift has meaning. This makes Carnegie's emphasis on listening even more relevant in the digital age than it was in his own. Modern life contains extraordinary tools for communication and extraordinary machinery for preventing sustained attention. We can contact almost anyone. We can also ignore the person directly in front of us while responding to someone thousands of miles away. We can accumulate hundreds of online connections while becoming impatient during a 5-minute conversation that does not immediately interest us. Carnegie's psychology suggests something simple. People remember how it feels to receive your attention. Not perfect attention, not theatrical eye contact. The feeling that for a moment you are actually there. Listening creates this feeling, but listening is often misunderstood as remaining silent until it is your turn to speak. Real listening is more demanding. Suppose a colleague says, I don't think I can handle another project right now. You hear the sentence, but what does it mean? Maybe they are overwhelmed. Maybe they dislike this particular project. Maybe they feel undervalued. Maybe there is something happening at home. Maybe they think the project itself is badly designed. Maybe they are testing whether it is safe to say no. A poor listener selects an interpretation immediately. They're being difficult. A better listener asks, what part feels unmanageable right now? Now information appears. Perhaps the problem is not workload at all. Perhaps the employee has 3 deadlines scheduled for the same day because different managers never coordinated. The solution changes once the problem is understood. This reveals that listening is not merely polite, it is epistemic. It improves what you know. Many interpersonal failures are diagnostic failures. We respond to the problem we assume exists rather than the problem the other person is actually experiencing. A teenager becomes quiet, a parent assumes disrespect, a spouse seems distant, the other partner assumes loss of affection, an employee misses a deadline, a manager assumes laziness, a friend cancels plans. We assume lack of interest. Sometimes these interpretations are correct. Often they are incomplete. Listening creates a pause between observation and explanation. That pause can save relationships. Imagine a manager whose employee has been arriving late. The manager could begin with accusation. This is becoming unacceptable. You need to be more responsible. Maybe that is eventually necessary. But suppose the manager begins differently. I've noticed you've been arriving about 20 minutes late several times recently. Is something going on? The employee explains that their childcare arrangement unexpectedly collapsed and they have been improvising for 2 weeks. Now the manager has information. The lateness still matters. The work still needs to be done. Standards have not disappeared. But the conversation is no longer based on a false story about indifference. Perspective changes response. This is a central principle in Carnegie's work. Try to see the situation from the other person's point of view. Again, this is easy to turn into sentimentality. Seeing another perspective does not mean believing that perspective is correct. It means understanding how the world looks from that position. Imagine negotiating the sale of a used car. You want $10,000. The buyer offers $8,000. From your perspective, they are undervaluing the car. From their perspective, you may be overvaluing it. Neither description alone explains the negotiation. To understand the buyer, you need to know what they care about. Maybe they are worried about maintenance costs. Maybe they have seen comparable cars at lower prices. Maybe $8,000 is simply their maximum budget. Once you understand their perspective, you can respond to the actual concern. Perhaps you provide maintenance records. Perhaps you explain recent repairs. Perhaps you reduce the price. Perhaps no agreement is possible. Perspective taking does not guarantee agreement. It improves the quality of disagreement. This distinction matters enormously. Empathy is often confused with endorsement. If I understand why you are angry, must I agree that your anger is justified? No. If I understand why an employee wants a raise, must I give one? No. If I understand why a friend feels betrayed, must I accept their version of events? No. Understanding describes an attempt to model another person's experience. Agreement is a judgment. The two should remain separate. Without this distinction, empathy can feel threatening. People resist understanding opponents because they fear that understanding will weaken their own position. But often the opposite happens. The more accurately you understand another position, the more precisely you can decide where you agree and where you do not. This is especially important during conflict. Imagine 2 neighbors arguing about noise. One has young children who wake easily. The other works late and occasionally has friends over. Each constructs a moral story. The first neighbor thinks they are selfish. The second thinks they are controlling. Now every incident confirms the story. A door closes loudly, selfish. A complaint arrives, controlling. The conflict is no longer about sound, it is about character. Carnegie's principles encourage a different approach. Begin with the other person's concern. I understand that you get home late and want to relax with friends. And from the other side, I understand that the noise is waking your children. These statements do not solve the problem, but they remove one obstacle, the need to prove that one's experience exists. People often argue harder when they feel their reality is being denied. Acknowledgement lowers that pressure. Then negotiation becomes possible. What nights are most important? What hours are reasonable? Could the gathering move inside after a certain time? Could advance notice help? Conflict shifts from identity to logistics. This is one reason respect is practically powerful. Respect lowers defensive costs. When people feel attacked, part of their cognitive capacity moves towards self-protection. They defend status, search for counter-arguments, recall your previous mistakes, interpret ambiguity negatively. The conversation becomes less about solving the original problem and more about preserving dignity. Carnegie repeatedly warns against unnecessary criticism, condemnation, and argument. This does not mean criticism should disappear. That would be impossible and unhealthy. The deeper point is that humiliation is usually an inefficient method of correction. Imagine an employee makes a mistake in front of a client. After the meeting, the manager says, "That was embarrassing. You clearly weren't prepared." What happens psychologically? The employee may focus less on the mistake and more on the accusation. "I was prepared. The instructions were unclear. The manager didn't tell me the numbers changed." The client asks something unexpected. The mind becomes a defense attorney. Now imagine the manager says, "When the client asked about the revised numbers, we gave them the old estimate. Let's figure out how that happened and make sure we have one source of truth before the next meeting." The mistake remains explicit, accountability remains, but identity has not been unnecessarily attacked. The first statement says, in effect, "You are incompetent." The second says, "Something failed. Let's understand it." This distinction between criticizing identity and addressing behavior is one of the most useful ways to modernize Carnegie. People need feedback. Children need correction. Employees need standards. Partners need to express dissatisfaction. Friends sometimes need to challenge each other. Avoiding criticism entirely can produce dishonesty. The question is how criticism is delivered. Specific behavior is easier to change than a global identity. "You interrupted me 3 times during that conversation" gives information. "You are incredibly disrespectful" gives a verdict. "You submitted the report 2 days late" describes an event. "You are unreliable" describes a person. Sometimes repeated behavior does justify conclusions about character, but beginning with observable behavior gives the other person somewhere to act. This is a useful principle far beyond Carnegie. Correct the behavior without unnecessarily attacking the self. There is another reason direct attacks fail. Human beings are remarkably talented at self-justification. Most people do not experience themselves as villains. Even when we behave badly, we usually have a story. "I was tired. I was provoked. They deserved it. I didn't know. I had no choice. Everyone does it. I was trying to help." It wasn't that serious. The story protects continuity between our behavior and our identity. Carnegie recognized this tendency long before modern psychology gave extensive attention to many forms of motivated reasoning and self-serving interpretation. If you attack someone's moral identity directly, you may strengthen the machinery of self-defense. Imagine telling someone, "You're selfish." They immediately search memory for evidence that they are generous. They remember helping a friend move, giving money to charity, staying late at work. The accusation generates counter-evidence. But suppose you say, "When you changed the plan without asking anyone else, it created extra work for 3 people." Now the conversation is anchored to an event. The person can still defend themselves, but the issue is harder to dissolve into a debate about their entire character. Carnegie's advice against arguing also needs careful interpretation. Arguments are not inherently bad. Science advances through disagreement. Courts require adversarial reasoning. Organizations need dissent. Democracy requires debate. Relationships sometimes need direct confrontation. The problem is not disagreement. The problem is treating disagreement as a contest of personal victory. Suppose you prove your partner wrong about a minor factual detail during an argument. You retrieve the message. There it is, evidence. You were right, they were wrong. Victory. But what was the original conflict about? Perhaps they felt excluded from a decision. Now you have successfully demonstrated that one sentence they remembered was inaccurate. The factual victory may be irrelevant to the relational problem. This does not mean facts do not matter. It means we should ask what kind of problem we are solving. If the question is factual, evidence matters. If the question is emotional, proving a factual point may not resolve it. If the question concerns values, more data may not settle it. If the question concerns trust, logic alone may be insufficient. Interpersonal intelligence requires diagnosing the level of disagreement. Carnegie's broader message is that making another person feel defeated is often a poor way to gain genuine cooperation. Imagine persuading someone publicly. They have 2 choices: admit you are right and lose status in front of others, or resist. You have unintentionally increased the psychological cost of agreement. This is why giving people a way to change position without humiliation can be so powerful. A good negotiator understands this. A good manager understands it. A good parent eventually learns it. Suppose a parent tells a teenager in front of friends, "I told you that was a stupid idea." Even if the parent is correct, the teenager now has an additional reason to defend the idea. Pride. If the same conversation happens privately, resistance may decrease. Dignity affects reasoning. That may not be ideal. It is human. Carnegie's framework takes human psychology as it is, rather than as pure rationality would prefer it to be. This is also why names matter in his system. A person's name is closely connected to identity. Remembering it signals recognition. Forgetting it can signal that the interaction was not important enough to retain. But even this principle can become mechanical. We have all encountered someone who uses our name too frequently. David, that's a great point. David, let me tell you something. David, I think you're going to love this. Instead of feeling personal, it feels like a sales script. The lesson is not to insert names at calculated intervals. The lesson is that identity matters. Remember people. Remember what they told you. Remember the project they were worried about. Remember that their daughter was applying to college. Remember that they hate early meetings. Memory communicates continuity. It tells someone that the relationship did not disappear from your mind the moment the conversation ended. This becomes especially powerful in leadership. Imagine a company with two executives. The first is charismatic on stage. They give inspiring speeches about people being the organization's greatest asset. But when speaking privately with employees, they barely remember previous conversations. The second executive is less polished. But months after meeting an employee, they ask, "How did that certification exam go?" Which interaction is likely to feel more personal? Specific memory often communicates more care than general warmth. Again, the principle is attention. Carnegie's techniques repeatedly return to it. Notice people, listen, remember, ask, appreciate, consider their interests, respect dignity. These behaviors all say some version of the same thing: you are real to me. That sentence may be one of the deepest human needs beneath social interaction. We want to be experienced as subjects rather than objects. An object is useful. A subject has an interior world. Manipulation occurs when we understand someone's interior world primarily to use it. Relationship occurs when we allow that interior world to matter independently of our objective. Consider a job interview. The candidate has studied influence techniques. They mirror the interviewer's posture, use the interviewer's name, ask carefully designed questions, offer strategic compliments. Everything is optimized. The performance may work, but now imagine the candidate is genuinely curious about the team. They ask what problems the team is struggling with. They listen carefully. They realize one aspect of the role may not fit their strengths and say so. Paradoxically, the second candidate may become more trustworthy because they are willing to risk the desired outcome in service of honesty. This reveals a useful test for manipulation. Would you still treat the person this way if doing so did not improve your chances of getting what you want? Would you still listen if they could offer you nothing? Would you still remember their name if they had no status? Would you still show appreciation if there were no strategic benefit? Would you still respect their dignity if they rejected your proposal? If the answer is no, the behavior may be less about relationship than leverage. This test becomes especially important in sales, networking, management, dating, and leadership, because these environments contain incentives to instrumentalize people. Networking provides an obvious example. Imagine entering a professional event. One mindset asks, "Who here can help my career?" Another asks, "Who here is interesting?" The first mindset produces scanning. You look at badges, titles, companies, status. You calculate potential value. The second produces conversation. Ironically, the second may also create better professional relationships, but that cannot be the reason for adopting it, or we return to the first mindset in disguise. Genuine curiosity has no guaranteed return. That is part of what makes it genuine. Carnegie's emphasis on making people feel important is therefore dangerous if interpreted carelessly. Everyone wants to feel important, he argues in different ways. There is truth in the observation. Recognition matters. Status matters. Competence matters. Belonging matters. But if your objective becomes make people feel important so they will do what I want, the principle becomes manipulation. A more ethical formulation would be, treat people as though their dignity matters because it does. Notice real contributions. Invite participation. Give credit. Do not humiliate unnecessarily. Allow people agency. The behavioral results may resemble Carnegie's recommendations. The moral foundation changes everything. This is especially important when power is unequal. Imagine a manager giving an employee extensive praise before asking them to work all weekend without additional compensation. The praise may be sincere, but power complicates the interaction. You are the only person I trust with this. That sounds flattering. It may also be pressure. Or consider a parent saying to a child, "You're such a good kid." Good kids help their parents. Praise has become a behavioral lever. The child learns that approval depends on compliance. Influence is not neutral when one person controls resources, status, affection, or opportunity. This is where Carnegie's framework requires stronger boundaries than many traditional readings provide. Interpersonal skills should not mean becoming endlessly agreeable. Respect does not require saying yes. Empathy does not require self-abandonment. Listening does not require unlimited availability. Avoiding unnecessary criticism does not require tolerating harmful behavior. Seeing another person's perspective does not mean their demands should control you. Suppose a coworker repeatedly asks you to finish their work. You understand why. They are overwhelmed. You appreciate their pressure. You listen. You sympathize. And you still say no. That can be healthy interpersonal behavior. In fact, without boundaries, Carnegie's principles can create people-pleasing. A person becomes skilled at making everyone comfortable except themselves. They avoid disagreement, avoid criticism, avoid saying no, constantly consider other people's interests, smile through resentment. Eventually, the relationship becomes dishonest. Boundaries protect sincerity. If your yes never has the possibility of no, it loses meaning. Imagine a friend who agrees to every invitation. They are warm, helpful, never complain. Then suddenly they disappear. Months of resentment had been accumulating invisibly. The friendship seemed harmonious because conflict was suppressed. This reveals an important difference between peace and avoidance. A relationship without visible conflict is not necessarily healthy. Sometimes it is simply silent. Carnegie is strongest when teaching us to reduce unnecessary friction. He is weaker if interpreted as teaching us to eliminate friction entirely. Some friction is necessary. A manager must sometimes deliver disappointing feedback. A parent must sometimes frustrate a child. A friend may need to say, "I think you're making a mistake." A partner may need to say, "This isn't working for me." A citizen may need to oppose another person's beliefs. Respect should improve the way conflict occurs, not prevent conflict from occurring. This distinction becomes crucial in leadership. One of Carnegie's recurring ideas is that people respond better when they feel ownership. Instead of simply issuing commands, invite participation where possible. There is sound psychology behind the intuition. Autonomy matters. People are often more committed to decisions they help shape. Imagine two managers implementing a new workflow. The first announces, "Starting Monday, everyone will use this process. I don't want debate. This is how we're doing it." The second says, "We need to reduce errors in the handoff between teams. Here's one process we're considering. Before we finalize it, I want to know where you think it will fail." The second manager does not surrender authority. They create participation. Employees may identify problems leadership missed. They also become contributors rather than passive recipients. But participation must be real. Nothing destroys trust faster than fake consultation. A leader asks for opinions after the decision has already been made. Employees spend an hour giving feedback. Nothing can change. The meeting was theater. Next time, people stop contributing. Influence based on respect requires honesty about the boundaries of influence. If a decision is fixed, say so. If part is negotiable, identify the negotiable part. People can tolerate limits better than manipulation disguised as choice. This is a useful modernization of Carnegie. Do not merely make people feel involved. Let them be involved when involvement is appropriate. Do not merely make people feel important. Give them genuine responsibility where possible. Do not merely appear interested. Become curious. The difference between appearance and reality is the difference between technique and character. Carnegie's ideas also become interesting when applied to digital communication. Consider email. Someone sends you a message that sounds rude. Your first impulse is to respond with equal sharpness. You type quickly. Before sending, imagine Carnegie standing beside you asking a simple question. What does this person want? Maybe respect, maybe information, maybe reassurance. Maybe they are simply having a terrible day. You delete the first response. Instead of writing, as I already explained in my previous email, you write, I may not have explained this clearly. The deadline applies to the final submission rather than the draft. The information is almost identical. The social meaning is different. The first version communicates. You fail to understand. The second leaves room for shared misunderstanding. This small change can prevent an unnecessary escalation. But we should not turn language into excessive softness. There is a modern style of professional communication where people become so afraid of sounding direct that every request is buried beneath layers of politeness. Just wanted to gently circle back whenever you have a moment. Absolutely no rush, but perhaps if possible. Clarity disappears. Respect and directness are compatible. Could you send the revised document by Thursday at 3? Clear, respectful, no manipulation required. Carnegie's principles should make communication more humane, not less precise. Another modern setting is social media. These platforms create strange incentives. Attention is public, disagreement is public, approval is counted. Humiliation can attract an audience. Under these conditions, many of Carnegie's observations become more relevant and more difficult. Suppose someone posts an opinion you believe is badly mistaken. You respond publicly with sarcasm. Hundreds of people like your reply. Socially, you have been rewarded. But did you influence the original person? Probably not. You may have made changing their mind more costly because changing now would mean yielding publicly to someone who mocked them. If your objective was entertainment or signaling loyalty to your own group, the response may have succeeded. If your objective was persuasion, it may have failed. This reveals that influence depends on the objective. Do you want to understand? Persuade, correct misinformation, signal values, entertain an audience, protect a boundary, end the conversation? Different objectives require different behavior. Carnegie often assumes that preserving goodwill is desirable. Usually it is, not always. There are moments when clarity matters more than likability. Imagine someone makes a racist joke at work. A Carnegie-inspired response interpreted too literally might search for a gentle way to avoid embarrassment. But perhaps direct correction is necessary. That's not appropriate here. The speaker may feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is not automatically a failure of interpersonal skill. Sometimes social friction protects a value. Or imagine a person repeatedly violates physical boundaries. The appropriate response may not be patient perspective taking. It may be distance, documentation, outside support, or direct refusal. Influence principles belong inside ethical boundaries. They should never become obligations to remain charming in unsafe situations. This is one of the most important limitations to place around Carnegie's advice. The person reading the book is not always the one who needs to change. Sometimes the relationship itself is unhealthy. Sometimes another person is manipulative. Sometimes the correct interpersonal strategy is not improved persuasion, but reduced contact. This matters because highly conscientious people can misuse relationship advice against themselves. If a conversation goes badly, they ask, did I appreciate enough? Did I listen enough? Did I avoid criticism? Did I understand their perspective? These are valuable questions. But another question is sometimes necessary. Is the other person acting in good faith? Relationships require reciprocity. One person cannot create healthy cooperation indefinitely with someone committed to exploitation. Imagine negotiating with someone who lies repeatedly. You can listen beautifully. Respect them, avoid humiliation, understand their incentives. None of this creates trustworthiness in them. Interpersonal intelligence includes recognizing limits. Carnegie teaches how to open doors. Wisdom includes knowing which doors should remain closed. There is another limitation in the concept of likability. How to win friends and influence people naturally focuses on behaviors that make social interactions smoother. But social acceptance can become a dangerous metric. If your primary objective is to be liked, you become dependent on other people's approval. Then disagreement becomes threatening. Saying no becomes difficult. Unpopular truth becomes expensive. Leadership becomes performance. The healthiest version of Carnegie is therefore not about maximizing likability. It is about reducing unnecessary hostility while preserving integrity. Those goals differ. A person with integrity may be disliked. A good manager may make decisions employees dislike. A parent may frustrate a child. A friend may challenge you. A doctor may tell you something you do not want to hear. A teacher may give a low grade. Respect does not guarantee approval, and approval does not prove respect. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is tell someone the truth clearly. The challenge is separating honesty from aggression. People sometimes justify cruelty by calling it honesty. I'm just being honest. Usually what follows is not merely information. It contains contempt. Honesty does not require humiliation. Suppose a friend asks what you think of their business plan. You believe it has serious weaknesses. False kindness says, "It's amazing. You're going to do great." Cruel honesty says, "This makes no sense. You clearly haven't thought it through." Respectful honesty says, "I think the problem you're solving is real, but I'm worried about two assumptions in the plan. Can we look at them?" The third response preserves both truth and dignity. That balance is central to mature interpersonal skill. Carnegie's ideas also illuminate something deeper about appreciation. Human beings adapt rapidly to what is consistently present. The first time a partner cooks dinner, you may feel grateful. After 5 years, dinner can become expected. The first month an employee performs exceptionally, the manager notices. After 3 years, exceptional performance becomes baseline. The first time a friend helps you through a crisis, you remember. After years of reliability, their availability can become invisible. Familiarity can erase gratitude. This is not necessarily selfishness. It is partly adaptation. The unusual becomes normal. Carnegie's insistence on appreciation can therefore be understood as an intervention against psychological adaptation. Notice again, the person who has always been reliable is still doing something valuable. The partner who performs a routine task is still spending time. The colleague who solves problems before they reach you is still contributing. Recognition restores visibility to what habit has made invisible. But appreciation should not become a substitute for fairness. A manager cannot solve underpayment by offering praise. A partner cannot avoid sharing household labor by expressing gratitude for everything the other person does. "You're amazing at managing the house" may sound appreciative while preserving an unequal burden. Words of recognition matter. Resources matter too. Pay, time, opportunity, responsibility, workload, power. Sometimes the respectful response is structural. This is where a 21st century reading of Carnegie must go beyond interpersonal technique. Many conflicts are not merely failures of communication. They involve competing interests and unequal power. Suppose employees want higher wages and owners want lower labor costs. Everyone can listen respectfully. The economic conflict remains. Suppose one partner wants children and the other does not. Perspective taking may increase compassion. It cannot manufacture a compromised child. Suppose two candidates want one promotion. Mutual respect does not create a second position. Some problems are genuinely zero-sum or fundamentally incompatible. Carnegie is most useful for removing unnecessary interpersonal friction from conflict. He cannot eliminate the conflict itself. That distinction protects his ideas from becoming naive, and perhaps it makes them more powerful, because even when interests conflict, dignity still matters. You can reject someone without humiliating them, negotiate firmly without contempt, end a relationship without rewriting the other person as a monster, fire an employee without unnecessary cruelty, disagree politically without assuming everyone on the other side is stupid, set a boundary without performing hatred. Human beings often add avoidable suffering to necessary conflict. Carnegie's principles help remove some of that excess. This brings us to influence itself. What does it actually mean to influence another person? The crude model is control. I want you to do something. I discover which psychological buttons produce the behavior. I press them. You comply. That is manipulation. A richer model is alignment. I understand what matters to you. You understand what matters to me. We search for a path that respects both sets of interests where possible. Influence becomes less about forcing behavior and more about making reasons visible. Imagine convincing a team to adopt new software. The control model says, leadership decided, use it. The superficial Carnegie model says, praise everyone, make them feel important, and cleverly lead them toward agreeing. The deeper model says, understand why people resist. Maybe they fear losing expertise. Maybe migration looks painful. Maybe the old system contains features leadership does not understand. Maybe previous technology changes were badly managed. Now address those concerns honestly. Show why the change matters. Acknowledge costs. Invite relevant input. Provide training. Give people some agency over implementation. Influence emerges through trust and understanding. This model is slower at the beginning. It may be faster over time. Coercion can produce compliance without commitment. People do what is required while supervision remains. Commitment is different. The person internalizes the reason. This is why Carnegie emphasizes speaking in terms of the other person's interests. Again, the phrase can sound manipulative, but consider its legitimate form. Suppose you want your roommate to stop leaving dishes in the sink. You could say, "You're so inconsiderate. I'm tired of cleaning up after you." Maybe that is emotionally accurate, but if the goal is behavioral change, it may trigger defense. Or you could say, "We both hate coming home to a messy kitchen. Can we agree that whoever cooks clears their dishes before bed?" Now the request connects to a shared interest. This does not guarantee success, but it reframes the problem from accusation to cooperation. The same principle appears in parenting. A child does not care that you need to leave the house because your schedule is efficient. They care about what matters to them. Instead of repeating, "Put your shoes on because we're late," perhaps you say, "If we leave now, we'll have time to stop at the playground before the appointment." This is influence through perspective. But ethical boundaries remain. Parents influence children constantly because children cannot evaluate every decision independently. The question is whether influence gradually develops autonomy or merely produces obedience. Good influence should eventually reduce the need for influence. The child learns reasons, the employee develops judgment, the student becomes capable of independent thought. If your influence works only while you are present, you may have created compliance rather than growth. This gives us a powerful criterion for leadership. Does your influence make other people more capable of thinking for themselves or more dependent on your approval? Carnegie does not always frame the issue this way, but his principles can be extended toward it. Respect means taking another person's agency seriously. The highest form of influence may therefore involve helping people see choices more clearly rather than making choices psychologically difficult to refuse. This distinction matters in persuasion. Consider urgency tactics. Offer expires in 10 minutes. Everyone else has already agreed. You don't want to disappoint the team. These statements influence behavior. They may be effective, but they often work by narrowing perceived freedom. Ethical influence does something different. It increases understanding. Here is what I believe. Here is why. Here is what I think matters to you. Here are the costs. Here are the alternatives. You remain free to disagree. Paradoxically, giving people genuine freedom can increase trust even when it reduces immediate compliance. This is the long-term dimension Carnegie sometimes implies without fully developing. Relationships are repeated games. You can manipulate someone successfully once, but if they later recognize what happened, the cost may exceed the original gain. Trust is slow to build and fast to damage. Suppose a salesperson pressures a customer into buying something unnecessary. The sale is successful. The relationship fails. Short-term influence and long-term influence point in opposite directions. This applies to friendship too. You can guilt a friend into attending an event. They come. Did you win? Behaviorally, yes. Relationally, perhaps not. You extracted attendance at the cost of resentment. Influence should therefore be evaluated across time. What happens after the person says yes? Do they still trust you? Do they feel respected? Would they willingly deal with you again? Do they feel they made a choice or surrendered to pressure? Long-term influence depends less on cleverness than credibility. This returns us to character. If people know you are willing to tell them things they do not want to hear, your praise becomes more credible. If they know you will respect a no, your requests become safer. If they know you will admit mistakes, your confidence becomes more trustworthy. If they know you do not exploit private information, they can speak openly. The strongest influence often grows from predictability. People know what kind of person they are dealing with. This is why Carnegie's interpersonal principles cannot be separated from integrity without eventually collapsing. Technique may create first impressions. Character determines what repeated interaction reveals. Imagine two managers. The first has mastered every communication technique. They praise strategically, ask questions, smile, remember names, and rarely criticize directly. But employees know that when senior leadership appears, this manager takes credit for successes and assigns blame for failures. The second manager is less polished, sometimes awkward, but gives credit publicly, accepts responsibility, keeps promises, and delivers difficult feedback privately. Which manager has more durable influence? The answer reveals the limit of technique. People do not merely respond to how you make them feel during one conversation. They build models of your character. Can I trust this person? Are they fair? Do they mean what they say? Will they protect me when I am absent? What happens when our interests conflict? Those questions determine relational depth. This suggests that the real psychology of winning friends is not about making people like you. It is about becoming someone with whom healthy relationships can exist. That includes warmth, but also reliability, curiosity, honesty, boundaries, generosity, self-respect, the ability to apologize, the ability to disagree, the ability to hear no, the ability to say no. Carnegie emphasizes many of the softer dimensions because people often underestimate them. But warmth without boundaries becomes compliance. Confidence without empathy becomes arrogance. Empathy without judgment becomes vulnerability to manipulation. Honesty